This is really important. Parish orphans and retrogrades, my friends, I want you to listen. That is how Bergoglio proceeds to generate a network of lies, intrigue, espionage, mistrust, and more effective than anything, fear. Bergoglio is a person who above all knows how to generate fear. However much he may work carefully to impress everyone with the appearance of a plaster saint, austere and mortified, he is a man with a mentality of power. If you think this is exaggerative, oh dear Pope-splaining listener, continue to listen. There's impressive evidence forthwith. We should note that this was written well over a year before Bergoglio was elected Pope. Important fact. Before anyone had reason to suspect that he might be more widely dangerous. I'll also add, because people online who are more cynical about this, I'd add the line, before also anyone had reason to grift, to write a book about this man. No one reads books about non-pontifical bishops unless they're extra interested Catholics who happen to live in the diocese of that bishop or archbishop. No way. No one grifts by reading episcopal books. They're not enough of celebrities in our culture unless they're the Bishop of Rome. So it's strong evidence that this book only got written because it was true and because Bergoglio cut such a strikingly power-mad figure even before he was Bishop of Rome. Sire continues, when I started my book, I always need more elbow space. When I started my book, I set myself the objective of transmitting Spanish language reporting of this sort to the English-speaking world. But there was another piece of evidence whose non-emergence had not been due to the language barrier. While I was living in Rome, I began to hear from journalists of a document called the Kolvenbach Report. This is very, very important. Stick it in your mind, the Kolvenbach Report, which several of them had been trying to track down without success. It was the report that Father Kolvenbach, the general of the Jesuits, had written back in 1991. The Italian stallion here was 10 years old. When it was, yeah, I'm not Rocky. I just thought I'd say it that way. Had written back in 1991 when it had been proposed to make Father Bergoglio, then, an auxiliary bishop in Buenos Aires. And it was rumored to be distinctly unfavorable. This is the man's real character profile. You hear people do it about me or my wife or other lay Catholics all the time. You hear some background on Father James Martin, S.J., the naughty pet. You hear it about some of the bishops who are less popular. How about the Bishop of Rome? This is real documentary history. The Kolvenbach Report. The Kolvenbach Report. The Kolvenbach Report. Very important. A copy of the report had been kept in the archive of the Jesuit General Curia in Rome, but it swiftly disappeared as soon as Bergoglio was elected Pope. In the course of my research, I discovered that at least one copy of the report existed in private hands, but its owner could not bring himself to share it with me for the purpose of publication. The nearest I was able to get to it was through a priest who had read it before it disappeared from the Jesuit archive. And he gave me the gist of it as follows. Ready for this? It's rather important. Father Kolvenbach accused Bergoglio of lack of psychological balance. Check. Deviousness. Check, check. Disobedience cloaked under a mask of humility. Check, check, check. And habitual use of vulgar language. Remember, Pope Francis, in his 4th year of his pontificate, said something about his enemies that he had called his enemies publicly when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires. In English, shit eaters and also shit lovers. It's literally what he called them. Coprophiliacs and coprophagiacs. Shit eater and shit lover. This is from the Holy Father. Okay? So that list, again, constitutes the following qualities of Bergoglio: a lack of psychological balance, deviousness, disobedience cloaked under a mask of humility, habitual use of vulgar language. One more time again. Lack of psychological balance. This is in 1991. Deviousness, disobedience cloaked under a mask of humility, habitual use of vulgar language. Parish over to retrogrades. 1991. Before anyone had reason to grift about Pope Francis, saw a psychological report being drafted with these 4 qualities that well qualify the last nearly 11 years now from the Vicar of Christ, the Bishop of Rome, the 266th Peter. If you told me that psychotherapy, which isn't my favorite study, I kind of think it's a sham, a psychotherapist had said, well, younger Bergoglio, early in his career, should be kept away from power because he has a lack of psychological balance, he's devious, he has disobedience cloaked under a mask of humility, and habitual use of vulgar language. I would tell you, that's a good psychotherapist. This is 32 years old, 22, 21 years before he would ever be Pope. Kolvenbach also pointed out, with a view to his suitability as a bishop, that Bergoglio had shown himself a divisive figure while provincial of the Jesuits in Argentina. After 11 years of the Francis pontificate, we could fairly say that Father Kolvenbach had got him completely right. Yes. Thank you, Henry Sire. If you hear this, I admire your work and thank you. Another key to Bergoglio's mode of acting is the political background of Argentina. Now, you've heard me refer to this more obliquely in words like the Peronist Pope several times on this channel, and I've never really done a full expose on who Juan Perón was. Who was Perón? Juan. Sire's going to tell us. It's so alien, Argentinian politics, to the Anglo-Saxon understanding that Sire's going to develop it for you with a little backstory. One of the first things I heard about Bergoglio when I went to Rome was from an Argentinian priest who said, what you've got to understand about Francis is that he's a pure politician. I've read that quote to you before. But there's more. At the time, I did not grasp the bearing of this. But you need to add that Francis's politics are modeled by the great figure in Argentina in the 20th century, Juan Perón, who was dictator of the country from 1946 to 1955, the years in which Bergoglio was growing up. Perón dazzled a whole generation of Argentinians with his unscrupulous, opportunistic style. I've referred to this before. He goes from right to left to right to left, claims to be a man of both sides. Truly Machiavellian. And his legacies continued to dominate the country's politics and life ever since, politics and political life ever since. Bergoglio was more than a generic disciple of the great man. Kind of like when you hear Hillary Clinton was tuteled by Saul Alinsky. More than generically. She sat at his knee and learned some. It's hard to find out exactly how much, but it's not just an admirer from afar. Same thing with Bergoglio and the man Juan Perón. When he was a novice master of the Argentinian Jesuits in the early 70s, now we're going back 50 years, not 31 or 32, but 51 or 52. He was actively assisting a party called the Iron Guard, that sounds dictatorial enough, who were working successfully to bring back Perón from exile, this sounds Napoleonic, for his final months in office as president until his death in 74. By ordinary standards, this was an unusual way for the novice master of a religious order to spend his spare time. But it illustrates the comment that was made to me by one Argentinian who had been a pupil of the young Bergoglio when he taught at a Jesuit school in the 60s. On the strength of a lifetime's personal knowledge, he described Bergoglio to me as un enfermo del poder, a man for whom power is a mania or a sickness. Maybe this guy, who's known Bergoglio his whole life, is a grifter. Yeah, maybe. Maybe everyone that knows anything about the man's Argentinian theology or politics say power is a sickness and an obsession with this man, and he learned two-faced politics. One hand washes the other from Juan Perón, who had a very distinct calling card, like the wet bandits from Home Alone, right? That's a calling card. Francis is Peronist. He says to Walter Casper in 2015, yo, bro, tell them you're out. You're on the outs with me. Tell them I did favor the Casper plan, but now it's out. You're disappointed, blah, blah, blah. Tell them all that. We're going back and forth because it confounds the IQ 98s and the IQ 97s and the IQ 102s, the normies, who's most people. You're not going to fool everyone all the time. There's going to be these pesky conservative trads in America. I'm not saying they're all IQ 130s either, but you're not going to fool them because they're like someone watching the magician's hand really closely from a foot away. They'll be able to see what we're doing, but we're just trying to win the 85 to 90%. That's the calling card of Francis and Perón and all the Argentines who follow this mode of political statecraft. Francis is interested in statecraft. By way of statecraft, remember in 2019 when it came out, that he's quite interested in spycraft as well, wiretapping on lots of the cardinals in the Vatican? Yeah, a lot of you didn't know that. Obsessed with power. So on the basis of reports like these, I proceeded to write my book. And I included in it a chapter on Bergoglio's career before his election. Thank you again, Henry Sire. In it, my purpose was to provide something of a character study, which had been sadly lacking to the cardinals when they elected him Pope in 2013. All right. Mr. Sire buys this excuse more than me. I say it's a tawdry alibi. A paper-thin alibi. Doesn't hold water. These cardinals have to answer to Almighty God for giving us this monstrosity of a pontificate.